Hey friends, Elizabeth here from Plant-Based Bride, back again with another video. And in today's video, I'm going to share with you the books that I read in September and the books I'm planning on reading in October. Now, before I jump into talking about the books that I actually finished in September, I'm going to quickly pop up on the screen the books that I started in September but didn't have a chance to finish. So these books are also going to officially be on my October TBR, and fingers crossed I'll be able to finish them in October, but I'm trying not to pressure myself to finish books within a month. I feel like that makes the whole process way more stressful, and the whole point of me trying to do this challenge of reading 100 books in 2020 was to rekindle my love of reading and make reading part of my day-to-day routine again after years of kind of letting my love of books fall to the wayside with, busy day-to-day life. So I really don't want to introduce a huge component of stress and competition into this challenge for myself. So yeah, just throwing that out there. I'm trying to be a little bit more realistic about the fact that sometimes books take you months to finish because you only feel like picking it up once every 2 weeks and reading a couple chapters. And that's totally fine. Not all books have to be the kinds of books that you pick up and read from sunrise to sunset for 2 days straight and finish it right away. Sometimes that's just not the vibe. And that's totally fine. So anyway, that said, let's jump into the books that I did actually finish in September. So the first book I picked up in September was When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. Alyssa Cole is known as a romance author, and this was her first foray into the thriller mystery genre. Sydney Green is Brooklyn born and raised, but her beloved neighborhood seems to change every time she blinks. Condos are sprouting like weeds, for sale signs are popping up overnight, and the neighbors she's known all her life are disappearing. Sydney channels her frustration into a walking tour and finds an unlikely and unwanted assistant in one of the new arrivals to the block. But Sydney and Theo's deep dive into history quickly becomes a dizzying descent into paranoia and fear. Their neighbors may not have moved to the suburbs at all, and the push to revitalize the community may be more deadly than advertised. Where do people go when gentrification pushes them out? Can Sydney and Theo trust each other or themselves long enough to find out before they too disappear? So I was immediately intrigued when I read the description of this book because I had never heard of a thriller based on the idea of gentrification, and I thought that was so smart, and I was really interested to see where it would go. And I definitely think it delivered as far as commentary on gentrification, on racism in America over the decades, and within real estate and development in particular. I think it's a really important issue that doesn't get discussed enough because it maybe doesn't feel as urgent to people as other issues. And while I can certainly understand that point of view, I really do think that gentrification and racism in real estate and development is a serious issue that needs to be explored and is clearly having a huge negative impact on many populations of people. But regardless, I do think that the commentary on that subject in this book was really well done. It was very interesting, and there was a lot of history included, and I thought the way that it was included was really interesting and compelling. So I feel like this is a good one to read if you're trying to learn more about gentrification, but you're not one to maybe pick up a history book or a textbook or read articles on it necessarily, because it really is tied into the narrative of the book. That being said, as much as I really enjoyed that portion, the actual thriller portion of the book was just way over the top for me. It was out of the realm of believability. I just couldn't suspend my disbelief that much, unfortunately. And, I really don't mind exaggeration to make a point or to, create a more clear commentary on something, but the villains were just exaggerated to such a ridiculous degree. They were really one-dimensional, super evil, cartoonish level villains. And with the rest of the story being so deeply rooted in reality and real issues, it just felt like there was a disconnect between the majority of the narrative and then this sort of evil villain cartoon narrative, and they just didn't quite mesh for me in my own mind. The ending also felt a little rushed. I think part of that was because of how cartoonishly evil the thriller portion was, that it sort of built up super quickly and very extremely, and then it had not a lot of time to kind of tie it up and bring it back to reality. I think the peak was too high to be able to resolve in time, if that makes sense. So the ending definitely felt a little rushed. I mean, this is an issue for me in a lot of more mystery thriller sort of novels where I just feel like the climax is left too close to the end of the book and there's just not enough time allotted to the resolution. So maybe that's just a personal preference. Maybe that doesn't bother other people. Let me know in the comments if you also find this, if you struggle with books that have too short of a resolution. I just find that pacing of a novel is something that's really important to me, and I really don't like when endings are rushed. The only other thing I'll mention about this book is, and I don't know if this is just me, maybe it is, I haven't seen anyone else mention this in any reviews of this book. So the main character, who is, I believe, in her mid to late 20s, I don't remember exactly off the top of my head, but she's solidly an adult. She's, probably within the same age range as myself. And she refers to her mother, not once, not twice, but many, many, many times, and literally every single time, as mommy. And I don't know if there's just an association within mystery thriller horror novels of mommy being like a creepy thing associated with creepy kids or ghosts or something. I don't even know. But for whatever reason, her referring to her mother as mommy throughout the whole book was literally the creepiest thing. It was never addressed. No one else ever commented on it. No reviews I've seen comment on it. So I feel like maybe this is just a personal issue of my own that I found it really creepy. But let me know in the comments down below if you read this book, if you also noticed it and found it creepy, or if it didn't bother you. And also, even if you haven't read this, do you know any adults who call their mom mommy? Is that a common thing in other areas? And maybe just me in my little, Toronto Canadian bubble, maybe I just don't know adults who call their mom mommy. I don't know. Let me know. Many trigger warnings for this one, so please do refer to the book card if you're thinking of reading this one. I listed as many as I could think of. The next book I finished in September was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. Set in the days of civilization's collapse, Station 11 tells the story of a Hollywood star, his would-be savior, and a nomadic group of actors roaming the scattered outposts of the Great Lakes region, risking everything for art and humanity. So, in reading the description of Station 11, which is this contemporary post-apocalyptic novel, I had no idea how close to home this would actually be, because even though the description mentions that this is sort of post-apocalyptic, post-civilization, it doesn't say why civilization unraveled. And while it said that it took place in the Great Lakes region, I guess I just assumed it would take place on the American side, because I feel like most of the books that I read end up being from an American perspective. And usually when I read Canadian work, it's because I actively sought out Canadian work. So I was really surprised to find that not only did this take place on the Canadian side of the border and actually predominantly in and around the Toronto area, which is where I live, but it also was a pandemic story, because civilization unraveled after a global pandemic. So there you go. Super, super relevant. Oh, and also another thing, it's about actors. So if y'all don't know, I went to school for musical theater. So when I realized how relevant this was to my personal life in this current moment, I kind of balked. I thought, maybe I'll leave this. Maybe I shouldn't read this right now. I don't know. But I'm really glad that I pushed through and decided to read it, because this might be my favorite read of the month. I didn't have any books this month that I really fell in love with, that I completely adored. I actually didn't give any 5 stars this month, but this one was a very high 4-star. I'm actually not really sure what was missing that made me not want to give it that final star. The only thing I can think of is that it did switch perspectives to a number of characters and go back and forth in time from the present to the past quite a few times. And that definitely made it a little bit harder to get really deep into the characters that we did have and really explore them on that visceral level, which is something that I really enjoy in the books that I read. I really want to know the characters. So maybe that was it, but again, I'm not really sure, because really, when I think about it, everything that I have to say is positive, so take that how you will. I definitely don't want to spoil this one, because I highly recommend that all of you read this if you are at all into post-apocalyptic novels, and if you are able to read something about a pandemic destroying civilization at this time. Obviously, many people have been personally affected by COVID-19, and if you can't handle this right now or ever, that's totally fine and I completely understand, but I really did enjoy this and I would recommend it. So I'll just leave it at that. I really enjoyed this. I happily gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And while this does have some pretty dark content, again, check the trigger warnings on the book card for as many as I could think of. It did have a surprisingly hopeful ending, which I think really helped, especially considering our current situation in the world. So Station 11, 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. The next book I read in September was Felix Ever After by Kacen Callender. Felix Love has never been in love, and yes, he's painfully aware of the irony. What's worse is that even though he's proud of his identity, Felix also secretly fears that he's one marginalization too many, Black, queer, and transgender, to ever get his own happily ever after. When an anonymous student begins sending him transphobic messages, after publicly posting Felix's dead name alongside images of him before he transitioned, Felix comes up with a plan for revenge. Felix begins a journey of questioning and self-discovery that helps redefine his most important relationship, how he feels about himself. So this book was a little bit polarizing for me, and from what I've seen from other reviews, I think for a lot of people. On the one hand, there were many aspects of the story that I absolutely adored. I loved the level of representation. We had a lot of different kinds of representation as far as race and sexuality and gender identity, which I think was wonderful to see in a young adult novel. There were also some really important discussions had. Obviously, from the description, you can infer that there's going to be discussion of transphobia, and that was definitely a significant portion of the book. But there's also discussions about race, misogyny, classism, privilege, intersectionality, and I think those issues were really well explored without getting into preachy or too educational feeling territory, which I'm sure would turn off any teenagers reading this. I also felt that the characters were really well developed and complex and flawed in a way that made them feel very real, and I definitely appreciated that. Now, with all that said, some of the characters were so complex and flawed that they were really hard to like. And by some, I mean most of them. And as I've mentioned before, I'm a very character-driven reader. The characters are really the most important thing to me in pretty much anything I ever read. And as much as I could relate to the characters in many ways, and as much as I appreciated that they were complex and flawed, sometimes those flaws really jumped out, you know? It's hard to, because I'm 28 years old. I'm reading a story about kids that are a decade younger than me. So obviously, me looking back at how teenagers are, you know, teenagers, I'm sorry to anyone out there who may be around that age group, but when you get older, you'll realize how cringy you were at the time. But when you get older, you, along with everyone else, looks back on that period of your life and just thinks, wow, I was so cringy. And I kind of felt that about the characters. It was a little frustrating to see them be so self-destructive and awful to each other. But again, that's coming from the perspective of someone who is very far removed from that time in my life. So again, maybe not the most fair judgment on this book, because it really is meant for a young adult audience who are much more in that time of their lives, and this is probably a lot more relatable to them. Regardless, I think this book has so much merit. It brings so many important discussions to the table, and I love that its own voices representation. So I would highly recommend this book, even though it wasn't one of my all-time favorites, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read The Deep by Rivers Solomon. The water-breathing descendants of African slave women tossed overboard have built their own underwater society and must reclaim the memories of their past to shape their future. Yetu holds the memories for her people. Their past, too traumatic to be remembered regularly, is forgotten by everyone save the historian. Yetu remembers for everyone, and the memories, painful and wonderful, traumatic and terrible and miraculous, are destroying her. And so, she flees to the surface, escaping the memories, the expectations, and the responsibilities, and discovers a world her people left behind long ago. Yetu will learn more than she ever expected to about her own past, and about the future of her people. If they are all to survive, they'll need to reclaim the memories, reclaim their identity, and own who they really are. So I was first introduced to Rivers Solomon's work by An Unkindness of Ghosts, which was such an incredible read. Sci-fi, very dark, very intense, a lot of representation, a lot of complex ideas. incredible. One of my favorite reads of the year. Definitely, I would not be surprised if it's in my top 5 favorites of this entire year. Highly recommend. Go read that book. So anyway, after I read that, I clearly felt that I needed to read everything that River Solomon has ever written and will ever write. And The Deep was one that I'd had on my list actually before I even heard of An Unkindness of Ghosts. And I was really curious to read this sort of alternative tale focused on mermaids. And this one definitely did not disappoint. It is a novella, so it is very short, and that is the primary reason that I gave it 4 stars instead of 5. I really just wish that there was more. I wish we'd had more time with the characters. I wish we'd learned more about the society. By nature of it being so short, it really did feel a little surface level at times. But even with that, the bits that we did get were so freaking good that it just made up for it. I would say the primary theme is intergenerational trauma, and how that trauma, as painful and horrific as it is, can also be something that brings a community together and can help to inform identity and give hope and give context to the present and future of a society, and that completely forgetting the trauma of the past is not necessarily the best way forward. At least that's what I took from it. And I thought it was really beautifully done. There was a lot of really intriguing imagery used, and I thought the use of a single character holding the memories for her people was a really clever way to get this idea across. This book is complex and painful and hopeful and heartbreaking and thought-provoking and full to the brim of beautiful queerness. I would again caution that you look into the trigger warnings before picking this one up. There is some really, really hard stuff to read in here, but if you are able to handle reading this book, I would highly recommend it. I just think it's such a beautiful work and so important. Next up in September, I read Record of a Spaceborn Few by Becky Chambers. Centuries after the last humans left Earth, the Exodus fleet is a living relic, a place many are from, but few outsiders have seen. Humanity has finally been accepted into the galactic community. But while this has opened doors for many, those who have not yet left for alien cities fear that their carefully cultivated way of life is under threat. When a disaster rocks this already fragile community, those Exodans who still call the fleet their home can no longer avoid the inescapable question: what is the purpose of a ship that has reached its destination? This is the 3rd installment in the Wayfarers series, and if you've been keeping up with my bookish videos, you will already know that the first 2 installments of this series I absolutely adored. 5 stars across the board. I was obsessed. They are, again, probably going to be 2 of my top 5 favorite books of the year. They were just everything about them incredible. Please go read them. And the thing about this series is that it's not a linear series following a specific group of characters. Each book goes into a different part of the world with new characters and explores a different story. So while they all take place in the same universe, they aren't a series in the sort of traditional way that we tend to think about a series. And I know that that bothers a lot of people. For me, the first 2 books were incredible regardless, but unfortunately the 3rd one for me, just because my expectations were so high from the first 2, it was kind of a disappointment, which I'm really sad to say. Not to say that I didn't enjoy it, because I really did. I still gave it 3 stars. I still enjoyed the entire experience of listening to the audiobook, but it just was not on the same level as the first 2. And I was really expecting to have another 5-star, one of my favorites of all time book situation, and I was really sad that it wasn't. But again, that could just be me. I know there's lots of really high ratings on this book, so there are clearly a lot of people who enjoyed it more than I did. But for me, it just felt a little more surface level than the other books. We covered a pretty wide variety of different characters and had lots of different POVs, and it just felt like we didn't get enough time with any of them to really dive into their stories. So I felt a lot more disconnected from this one than I have in the past 2 books in the series, which again surprised me, because I really feel that Becky Chambers' characters are the heart of her stories, and they are what have really made me adore the first 2 books in this series. So again, I was just really sad to see that as much as the characters I think had a lot of potential and were well written for what we got, we just didn't get enough from any of them for me to really feel for them and feel connected and invested. So for me, it was just kind of there. I didn't cry even once, which is shocking because I cry at the drop of a hat. And I definitely cried multiple times in both of the first 2 books. It just didn't really connect for me. So I'm really sad to say only 3 stars, but again, even despite all those problems, it was still a great book and I really enjoyed it. And I would still recommend that if you are reading a series that you read this one. I think it's worth your time. It does give a lot more information about the world. And I think that that is interesting if you're already invested in this world as a whole. But I would probably recommend that you lower your expectations a little bit because for me, this was my least favorite of the 3 in the series. And now on to the final book that I finished in September, which is The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek by Kim Michelle Richardson. In 1936, tucked deep into the woods of Troublesome Creek, Kentucky, lives blue-skinned 19-year-old Cussie Carter, the last living female of the rare Blue people ancestry. The lonely young Appalachian woman joins the historical Packhorse Library Project of Kentucky and becomes a librarian, riding across slippery creek beds and up treacherous mountains on her faithful mule to deliver books and other reading material to the impoverished hill people of eastern Kentucky. Inspired by the true and historical blue-skinned people of Kentucky and the brave and dedicated Kentucky Packhorse Library Service, The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek showcases a bold and unique tale of the Packhorse librarians in literary novels, a story of fierce strength and one woman's belief that books can carry us anywhere, even back home. This was the selection for my book club in September. I have a book club that is hosted over on Patreon. You can check it out with the link below if you're interested in joining. And we decided we wanted to read some historical fiction this month, and this was the book that was most voted for. And I have to be honest, I have read basically nothing about this period of time, the 1930s in Kentucky. So I was going into this with very little knowledge of this time period, and I had never heard of blue-skinned people. So this was a completely new world to me. I found it very fascinating. I think the best part of it for me really was learning about the blue-skinned people and, how they came to be, some more of the medical reasons for why they were the color that they were, because not only were they seen as people of color and treated as such, but there was an extra level on top of that of people being afraid of them, even to the level of thinking that they were maybe sick and contagious or possibly possessed or, in league with the devil. There was a lot of misunderstanding and fear around these people. It was definitely really hard to read about how they were treated, and there were definitely some parts that I think could be very triggering to people, especially people of color reading this story. So I would caution yet again that you check out the trigger warnings if you're thinking of picking this one up. That said, I found it really fascinating. I felt that the beginning started off pretty slow. I was having trouble getting into it, but as we got into about halfway through the book, it really started picking up and I started connecting a lot more to our main character and some of our secondary characters, really rooting for them and hoping the best for them. I definitely got emotionally invested, and for me, this one was a pretty solid 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, so those are all the books that I finished in September, and now I'm going to share with you the books that I'm planning on reading in October. First things first, I'm going to remind you of the books that I have already started that I'm hoping to finish in October. So these books up on the screen right now, I have already talked about on my channel, so I'm not going to talk about them again, but they are officially on my October TBR. Okay, so the new additions to my October TBR are The Tao of Pooh by Benjamin Hoff. This is, of course, inspired by my trip to the ROM exhibit on Winnie and the Pooh with my husband for our anniversary in September. And then, of course, I went ahead and made a Winnie the Pooh theme in his bullet journal for October. So in going to that exhibit, in exploring it more to create the theme, I remembered that my husband actually gave me this book pretty early in our relationship, and I got started reading it. I think I got about a quarter of the way in, and then for whatever reason, I put it down and never picked it up again. So I'm going to read it this month because it's been almost 6 years since my husband gave it to me, and I'm going to read it now. Is there such a thing as a Western Taoist? Benjamin Hoff says there is, and this Taoist's favorite food is honey. Through brilliant and witty dialogue with the beloved Pooh Bear and his companions, the author of this smash bestseller explains with ease and aplomb that rather than being a distant and mysterious concept, Taoism is as near and practical to us as our morning breakfast bowl. Romp through the enchanting world of Winnie the Pooh while soaking up the invaluable lessons on simplicity and natural living. The next book on my October TBR is something a little little creepy for spooky season, and this is The Companion by Callender. The other orphans say Margot is lucky. Lucky to survive the horrible accident that killed her family. Lucky to have her own room because she wakes up screaming every night. And finally, lucky to be chosen by a prestigious family to live at their remote country estate. But it wasn't luck that made the Suttons rescue Margot from her bleak existence at the group home. Margot was handpicked to be a companion to their silent, mysterious daughter, Agatha. At first, helping with Agatha and getting to know her handsome older brother seems much better than the group home. But soon, the isolated Gothic house begins playing tricks on Margot's mind, making her question everything she believes about the Suttons and herself. Margot's bad dreams may have stopped when she came to live with Agatha, but the real nightmare has just begun. And the last new book on my October TBR is actually my book club selection for this month. We wanted to go with something a little spooky for October, but because we're trying to be responsible about choosing something that hopefully will not have any subject matter that is distressing to any of us in the book club, it's taking us a little longer to select which book we want to go with. And there you have it. Those are all the books I read in September and the books I'm planning on reading in October. I would love to know your thoughts if you've read any of the books mentioned in this video. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought. And of course, if you have any recommendations for me, please let me know. Some of my favorite reads this year have been recommendations from you. And I feel like if you've been watching my bookish videos since January, you're starting to get a really good feel for my taste. So let me know. And with that, I'm gonna get going. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends. I want to take a quick moment to thank my patrons for their support. Extra special thanks to our newest patrons, Victoria, Janet, Julia, Lisa, Annette, Lance, Mylen, Jessie, Kiara, Erica, Stacy, another Stacy, Heron May, Sandra, Amanda, Micah, Zoe, Sarah, and Christina. Welcome all of you to the squad. We are so excited to have you. If you at home want to join the squad, feel free. There's a link in the card and in the description box down below. And if you're looking for something else to watch, I recommend you check out this video and this video.